This is the Resilient Schools podcast on the B Podcast Network. I am the creator, Jethro Jones. In this podcast, we help schools become resilient, which means that they are able to adapt and overcome any situation that presents itself. Enjoy the show. Today, I am honored to have Nadine Levitt on the program. Nadine is a Swiss-born German, Kiwi, U.S. transplant, and founder of the music technology company Whirly LLC. She began her career as a lawyer, but after 6 years of practice, she began to pursue a career in music as a professional opera singer and songwriter. She has performed extensively all over the United States and the world, sharing the stage with greats like David Foster, Andrea Bocelli, and Kiri Te Kanawa. Passionate about music in school, she sits on the national board of Little Kids Rock, and in 2016 led the development of the music education platform Whirly EDU, which empowers student voices and makes it easy to bring a fun and effective music education to schools. Nadine is also an author of children's books, including the My Mama Says book series, which teaches kids to identify, acknowledge, and direct their emotions. Well, Nadine, thank you so much for joining me on the Resilient Schools podcast today. I appreciate having you here and to hear about what you're doing. And I wanted to start by talking about PD Reimagined, which is taking a different approach to preventing teacher burnout. And teacher attrition is such a big idea right now. What can you tell us about PD Reimagined?
Yeah, teacher attrition is such a big deal and has been on my mind for about 2 years. So this has been 2 years in the making. I come from a different I don't come from a traditional trajectory within education. I've been in education for about 10 years, but I come from kind of both the creative side, having been a touring opera singer, as well as the corporate side, having been a lawyer, and then on the business end. And I think PD Reimagined combines those worlds in an interesting way, in the sense that in a corporate setting, if morale is low, if people are leaving and so forth, and there's the competence of people is going down, so morale is low. What do you do? Well, you bring in usually motivational speakers to shift mindsets, and there's a lot of really interesting work that people have done on that. There's a wonderful study by Imodino Yang, and I think anyone who can look it up, go look at the TEDx talk that she did in Manhattan. That was brilliant. But she talked about how inspiration can shift mindsets, and that's a really crucial piece of it. So motivational speakers is one thing. Another thing is team building exercises, making you feel like you're not alone in this sort of community, a sense of community, and creating that safe space. The third thing is related to value. How do you provide a sense of value to these people so that you're feeling heard, feeling honored, feeling valued? And some people in the corporate world do that through gifts, experiences. Sometimes it's just thank yous, and sometimes it's salary increases, or bonuses. So what we've done is emulated that in PD Reimagined. And every month, teachers who sign up get a care package. It's all based in self-care and wellness. So one of the things that we noticed is that teachers find it extremely difficult to take care of themselves. They don't often know what self-care is because they're such giving people. They're all thinking, how can I bring this back to my students? How can I bring this back? And we really wanted to encourage them to put their own oxygen mask on first. So these are care packages for them, not things that they can bring back to the classroom. It's self-care packages.
Mm-hmm. Let me ask you a quick question here, because I think that the idea of teachers taking care of themselves is what is going to lead to a school being resilient. One of the things I say often is that resilient schools are led by resilient principals who support resilient teachers who teach resilient students. And what happens there is that it's this self-perpetuating thing that is a cycle that everybody can feed into and feel, because they are all part of that thing, and they are all part of the experience of being resilient and taking care of yourself. And that's so important, and something that we don't think about. I want to ask a question about these bringing in speakers, for example. I see that as a microwave type approach, that it's this fast jolt of energy or whatever that makes you feel good in the moment. but then after that it fades. And so you started getting into this other aspect of it, that it's ongoing with the gifts and appreciating value and taking care of yourself. So talk about how those two things work together: the short hit inspiration and then the slow cooked. You're in Austin, so you know about slow smokers and slow cooking meals and how much better that is. So talk to us about that.
Yes, so it is. You're right. It's absolutely. It's actually a journey. So every month has its own theme. They get their care package, which actually kicks off. That's the first sort of hit, the microwave hit. Actually, there is the care package that makes you feel good in the moment. It does last a little bit longer because it's things that you can do for yourself to take care of yourself. And then we bring in, they don't know who the speakers are every month. So there are hints of who the speaker is, and there's the excitement that builds with that. So we've had a lot of our participants say how exciting it is for them to sort of work with all of the school to think about like, who could this be? And so on and so forth. And then they come to the virtual summit and there's this speaker who speaks about the theme. And there's a guest, the speaker. And then after this microwave hit of inspiration, as you call it, which I love, they work in groups and they collaborate and they come up with some strategies that what was the big aha moment basically? And what are some strategies that I could use in my daily life that I could commit to trying? So they then share those back with us and they make a commitment to try something. And it can be as simple as listening to a song in between classes. It can be 30 seconds of a song, and it's amazing how quickly that uplifts you. So we've given them a bit of a toolkit of things that they can do in 2 minutes or less, or 3 minutes or less, just to refuel them and remind them of this journey. So really, it's an ongoing monthly cycle, and we build on it every month.
Yeah, so tell me some of the themes that are, not all of them obviously, but some of the themes that are meaningful and valuable that you think really resonate with teachers.
Well, our first one was on self care specifically. It was on how do you get up when you don't know where the ground is? And we had a speaker who was, her name is Kath Koshel, who was fantastic. She was the cricket captain of Australia when she, in a freak accident, broke her back and she had to relearn how to walk. She was just catching a ball, landed wrong, broke her back. And she, in that instance, was trying to make sense of what was happening to her and why it happened to her. And so when she met somebody and fell in love in rehab, as they were rehabbing her, she thought, well, maybe this is why it happened to me, that I could meet this love of my life. And, they kind of went down this whole journey. And then the day before they were both to leave rehab, he committed suicide.
Wow.
So she had to like get up again and then rebuild her life. She leaned on kindness of others and herself. And she loved how it made her feel when she was kind to other people. And when other people were kind to other people or her. And it was something that was just really living with her values. And then she built up her life again. She started a nonprofit called the Kindness Factory. And as she was training for a triathlon. And as she was training on the bike, got hit by a drunk driver, broke her back again, and had to, for the second time, go through all of this. For the third time, really lean into her belief system and her values. But so this is a woman who knows resilience. This is a woman who knows like how to get up.
Yeah.
And life happens to you. You can either be influenced by it or you can influence it. But she is just this great example, and some of the things that she shared, real strategies for in the moment when those waves come, where you feel those waves of overwhelm or when you feel those waves of anxiety. What can you do? Some like breath work, for example. So that was one. Another one was we had some really amazing guests. We had Chris Harrison and Lauren Zima on talking about the power of curiosity. And then we had Antonio Viragosa, who used to be the mayor of LA, talk about how do you move through criticism and opposition and have a growth mindset and really continue. Talk about resilience. You need a growth mindset,
Yeah.
right? Not going to happen overnight. It needs to be something that you put effort into, and it's not an end destination, it's a journey. So those are just some of the things. We've also had some James Fauntleroy, who's a two-time Grammy Award-winning artist, or four-time maybe. He's a songwriter and a producer, and he's best known for having co-written a lot of Justin Timberlake stuff. So he was talking about the power of music to move you. And so his strategies were specific to like, how can you utilize and leverage music to reinvigorate, refuel you? And, it feeds into resilience too, because sometimes when you feel all alone, you put those headphones on and you put on a certain song. That's that unseen, unspoken friend who just puts his hand on your shoulder, when you in those times that you need it.
Yeah, I like that idea. Now, I like music, but I'm not like you, a singer and songwriter. So I have this different appreciation of it. However, my great grandpa was an organist and directed a school of music for several years. And what I think is so amazing is that music has this power to bring us together, that somebody can write lyrics to a song that can impact millions of people because of that, and they have this ability to transcend the typical ways of interacting to make it so that we can see and hear others in different ways. And I think that's one of those little things that's just so meaningful and powerful that you don't really think about. And truly, music is powerful in that regard, and something that can bring people together in ways that other things just can't. And, one of my rants is that we're taking out music from schools and decreasing funding for that because it's not a quote unquote tested area. And yet that's an area that could, literally save people's lives because of what it does. What else would you add to that?
Yeah, absolutely. Look, I have an edtech platform, Wally EDU, and we used to work with Camo on PTSD specifically. So vets with PTSD working on music therapy. And here's the thing about, and actually Wally EDU itself teaches music, yes, but the end goal is not just to teach music, it's to teach social and emotional skills, because there are so many things that you're doing with music. You talked about collaboration earlier. Problem solving is a good one, because you're doing the same thing when you're learning a song. But the most powerful thing to me about music, and I just want to point out, we don't teach math to be a mathematician, or science to be a scientist, or English to be a writer. I don't think we should be teaching music to be a musician from the outset. I think that
Yes.
should be elective, but I don't. I think that it sets us up for failure. But most people in the world like music. They appreciate music. They might not play, they might not write music, but they listen to the radio. And here's the physiological thing that's going on with music. Music makes us feel things in part because it's one of the only things that can actually get inside our bodies, right? And like our eardrums make our eardrums move, and our brain's going, what just happened? Like, what was it? And it's trying to catch up with like trying to recognize patterns of what this could be. And so therefore it brings up memories for people. It brings up other past experiences and patterns and so forth. So it's kind of an interesting, very human experience that music makes us feel things, and it can interrupt other emotional cycles that can otherwise hijack us. And so that's why I think music, just listening to music, and that's why we've created a bunch of different playlists for people to make it really easy. Depending, but Spotify, all the streaming services do this too. You can actually search for something by emotion, and you can just listen to songs by emotion, because it can set the tone and it can make you feel things.
Yeah. So I have a great story that goes along with that. I have this song that I listen to whenever I go get ready to present or something like that. And it's what helps get me in the right zone. So when I was in Siberia, Russia, for 2 years serving a mission for my church, we did a concert. And I think there were like 20 people there. Everybody was really good at singing and musically inclined, and I was the only one who was not. In 10th grade, my choir teacher said, Jethro, I think it's better if you just mouth the words, which obviously is a horrible thing to say, right? But I didn't really have a role in that group because I couldn't sing. So they asked me to be the MC and the conductor. but I didn't really know how to conduct, but it didn't matter that much because they could do just fine without me. And I was basically, just there for show. It was very kind how they were treating me, right? But we sang this song there that was called Cone, which is by it's like basically a Russian folk song. And it's this beautiful song that I just love. And every time I feel like I need to be my best, I listen to that song and it helps remind me to be my best and gets me in the mood to be my best. And this happened over 20 years ago. And still to this day, I feel that every time I listen to that song, and it brings back that moment 20 plus years ago where I was there doing something that was awesome. And you're totally right about that. It really can help us change our moods. And I've seen with kids in school how putting on some music when a kid is dysregulated totally can help them get regulated back to where they need to be. And it's just incredibly powerful. I knew we'd get to music at some point in this conversation. I figured it'd be difficult not to, right?
Yeah, absolutely. It's so ingrained in who I am. We had actually they've done a lot of studies, really interesting studies in the corporate world. Sort of they said if a store plays classical music, people are more likely to buy the more expensive items.
Mm,
Isn't that interesting?
that
So
is.
I think that there's a lot more studies that need to be that I'd love to see anyway about the effects of different types of music, because there's definitely the right type of music for different things. Like if you're trying to calm down and calm your central nervous system, the last thing you want to do is listen to like Eminem.
Right.
But if you are on a bike and you're trying to get up a hill, Eminem's perfect. And like one of those calming sort of classical music, it's going to drive you nuts. So,
Hmm.
so I think that's the right thing for different circumstances. And depending on what it is that you want, you can absolutely, that awareness of the fact that music can make you feel something now puts the power in your hands to be able to say, well, how do I want to feel? Because there's this emotional response that's going to come based on just the music that you choose. So
Yeah. Yeah, that's very true. And I've definitely seen that. Before we move on, let's hear from our sponsors. So let's get back to the topic of PD Reimagined. And you talked about a couple of things: self care, curiosity, music as themes in that. And a lot of teachers and school leaders listening to this might think this is out of reach. I can't do this. I don't have time. I don't have energy to do these special things. I can barely just like make it to school each day. What's your advice for someone who's starting to feel that burnout? What can they do to rekindle their passion, rekindle their why in themselves?
so I find it very interesting. It's the perception of time scarcity. And I get it. I'm a mom. I run multiple organizations. I am very passionate about lots of different areas of my life. And time scarcity, I sometimes feel myself getting sabotaged by this sort of mindset. But it's really brought on by an emotional response where you're nearing overwhelm. And the thing about overwhelm is that it basically is a response to other really big feelings that you're having on your central nervous system. And your central nervous system is sounding the alarm, and it stops you from responding or problem solving. It really makes you react. It's like, when you're grieving, for example, you're grieving the loss of something. It's very, very difficult to then focus on anything. I remember, I mean, not so long ago, I just my dog of 13 years died, and it was devastating. And I'm trying to read a science journal, like I need to get something in, and I read the same paragraph 37 times before I finally was like, I can't do this right now.
Yeah.
So I get the overwhelm piece of this. You can interrupt overwhelm, and just being aware of how it works, I think, is a big piece of this. Being aware of how these emotions work and how you can interrupt it. So, just for example, stopping whatever it is that you're doing so that that momentum isn't continuous, and do something completely different. It might be, you know what? I know I have to check these assessments or whatever it is. But right now I'm going to spend 10 minutes going for a walk outside or listening to music just to interrupt whatever that cycle is. And the nice thing about PD Reimagined is that built this for you so that people can utilize it, and it's actually free for teachers to participate. We do have districts as partners as well, where we come in for physical sort of activations. But if a teacher is feeling close to burnout, we want this to be accessible to them. So thanks to amazing sponsors, corporate sponsors, including Nickelodeon, who really took a chance on us early on and was like, we believe in this. We want to support you, and made the whole pilot possible. Worldly EDU also. This is available. So basically, everything is sent to you. So it can be in your home, or it can be, the care packages are in your home. You can catch the virtual summits live or after the fact. You have access to communicate with other teachers. But I think it's very difficult if you stop the cycle of overwhelm. It's very difficult to logically reason that 10 minutes in a day is not obtainable. Like, you have to be able to find 10 minutes in a day for you.
Yeah, that is so powerful, Nadine, because it feels like we can't do that. I don't have any time for myself. But what you said there is so key. Once you stop and interrupt the overwhelm, then you can find it. And that's the beauty of this, is that so much is going on in our own minds, and we are just believing everything that our mind is telling us, even when that is not even the case, right? And so this idea of interrupting the overwhelm and then saying, okay, once I do that, now I can find time because I'm not feeling overwhelmed in this moment. And that overwhelm is going to come back, right? It's not like, listening to your favorite song is going to make it so you're never overwhelmed again. It's going to come back, but it's about establishing these patterns, routines, habits that keep you leveled and not so overwhelmed. What else would you add there?
I think the more that you do it, the more that you apply these skills and you're learning these skills and develop these skills, the easier it is to come back from overwhelm. Yes, it will continue to come back, but the easier it'll be for you to deal and process it. I like to think of all emotions, they're really just messengers, and they're trying to signpost something for us. So when you're feeling overwhelmed, it's just sounding an alarm that your nervous system needs a break. Just when you think of it that way, like, everything has its own message. Anger, for example, I hate it when people say it's a negative emotion, because I don't think it is. I think it's all our emotions are just responses, emotional responses that we can't control, and they'll come and go. We can control the thought patterns that you just referenced earlier. The thought patterns that, and I just want to sort of give a little background on what that is. So your thought patterns, we are as human beings just wired to recognize patterns. Can you imagine how overwhelming it would be in life if we didn't recognize patterns, if we couldn't automate certain decisions like, oh, how to tie my shoelace every time I walked out the door? If I had to go, okay, now, is this the right way to do it? Is this the best way to do it? Like, you do a risk assessment, yep, out the door, off you go. So we use these patterns of behavior to figure out what's the best response for us. Those patterns can be based on actual experiences. It can be based on things other people have told us. It can be based on media and movies. And often they're not based in fact. So the
Mm-hmm.
stories that we try to make sense of things that happened with patterns of behavior. So you have a lot of different. I think a lot of people feel overwhelmed when they have a lot of different projects on at the same go and at the same time, and a lot of them have the same deadlines or similar deadlines, and they start to feel overwhelmed because there's too many things going in the hippocampus of your brain. So it can only have one thing at a time in there. And when they're competing, it's your central nervous system going, which one do you want? Like, make up your mind, you know? And so, what's interesting about the pattern recognition and the thought process and the stories that we tell ourselves, is what I call it, is we can control that. And the more that we're aware of it. So Brene Brown has a very powerful strategy that she recommends, which I love and I also use with my kids, which is when you become aware that you're telling yourself a story, say it and say, right now, I'm telling myself the story that you don't care about what I'm asking you to do. And what's interesting is, my kids have started picking this up. And so my 8-year-old the other day, when I got super frustrated and really disappointed in some of the things that she was doing, because she was not getting ready for school. And we'd had this whole conversation, we'd had this whole like agreement, and I thought we were good, and we weren't. She could see my face, and she said, "Hang on a second, mom." before you say anything, are you telling yourself the story? I don't care. And I'm like, you know what? I am telling myself a story, and here's why. But it did interrupt, just the awareness interrupted the cascade of emotional responses to those stories that I was telling myself. And I could, respond rather than react. And I think so often, just the awareness, it doesn't mean we don't feel emotions and we don't feel challenging emotions. We will, and we'll continue to do that. But at the end of the day, they're only present in order to signpost what it is that is meaningful to us and what we care about. And it's trying to motivate us to behave in a way that is most fulfilling for our lives.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. I had these cards that I put on my door as a principal that said, I have a storyline, which is basically a permission for teachers to come into my office and say, here's my storyline card. This is the story that I'm telling myself, and tell me if this is accurate or not. Like, and it usually revolved around, you're mad at me as the principal because of whatever. And 99% of the time, I actually was not mad at them, and I didn't even know they were holding this grudge. And I was talking to a principal last week, and she said that a teacher was very upset with her because as the teacher was coming in from recess with her kids, the principal was looking at her watch, which the teacher interpreted as, I'm late, I'm in trouble, she's mad at me. And the principal was just standing there and got a text message, and her smartwatch notified her. And so her looking at her watch had nothing at all to do with this teacher, but the teacher was upset for days because she thought she was going to be in trouble because she came in late one day, even though she didn't even know if she was coming in late. She just thought that that's what was going on. And these stories are so corrosive. And like you said, they're just patterns. We see someone looking at their watch. We think they must be checking the time, and they must think that we are doing something wrong because that's a pattern or whatever. And that's really, really challenging. Anything else you want to add?
Oh, yeah, I love that you had that card. I think that's a really, really powerful leadership tool. Um, I would encourage any leader to take that on. That's a really powerful strategy. I love that.
Yeah, I will definitely put a link to those cards because there were more of them, not just the storyline card, but things that are uncomfortable for you to talk to your boss about, especially in a school setting. I'll put a link to those in the show notes because they're so powerful and they resolve so many concerns.
One of the other things though that you referenced, but you didn't, it wasn't sort of, it wasn't as top of mind, but it was in order to allow or give permission to teachers to even share some of those storylines, you need two things. One, you need a relationship with them where they trust you, right? So you have built this community where there's a common goal and there's not an attack of things. There's no like the risk. I think when people feel risk, it really limits learning. And the other thing is like a relationship where you're feeling both challenged and supported. So
Hmm.
I think with those two sort of sides to the relationship, I think that was obviously present when you were a principal with teachers giving you those cards. But that's also a very powerful way to build a resilient school because you're in it together. And I think that feeling of isolation, of feeling alone, there's this emotion shame that we might know about. But I think a lot of us hide that. They hide certain things and those patterns and those storylines because we fear that it makes us not good enough. We fear that that might be true. And by sharing our storylines and by sharing it with other people, there's no way that shame can live in those circles. So
Hmm.
I think, the role of shame in a resilient school is also really, really important that we feel like um, there's no space for shame.
Yeah, and when you share shame, then it makes it so that it's not shameful anymore.
Correct.
Because the shame is that you're holding it inside, that you're doing it, that it's me doing this. Nobody knows that I'm making these mistakes. Nobody knows that I'm not doing this right. I'm the only one who knows, and that is what is shameful. And so when you go tell other people something that's shameful, they're usually like, oh yeah, I've done that before. Or, yeah, I've experienced that. That's not a big deal. And then you feel this weight lifted off your shoulders that is just incredible.
Yeah, as long as the culture is one that is like that, and that people aren't using it to then push you down further and shame you more.
Yes.
But I think, absolutely. I think the nice thing is it can really it can build a depth to community, because if you realize that there's a commonality that all of us flub the dub, like all of us spill
Yeah.
milk sometimes, right? All of us make mistakes, and it's only with those mistakes, it's only with moments where we go, "Oh god, I wish I hadn't done that," with regret and all those sorts of things, that we learn. That's how we learn. That's what prompts us to evaluate and reflect on how we could do things better. So the more that I think, one other thing that I wanted to touch on is, and I hear it in other, in your podcasts of the past as well, but is the need for people to take responsibility for their part. And I think that's also really, really powerful, that if for PD Reimagined, one of the questions we asked our participants was how many of them felt like they were leaders in their schools. And did they feel like they had any leadership role? I think was the question. I was expecting 100% to say yes, because you are leading a classroom, right? And
Right.
whether or not you're leading anything else, you are leading these students in the classroom. And there are lots of opportunities, even when you're not formally sort of a leader, for you to lead. And so I was very surprised when it was just over halfway, half of the participants said that they felt like they were leaders. So that was surprising to me. And I think, the power of feeling like you have a leadership role is that you then both look to external factors, but first you start with, what can I do differently? What can I do differently, and so that I can have a different outcome? Because in every situation where there's a result that you don't like, or it's some kind of an obstacle or challenge that you're facing, there's always something that we can also do. There might also be external factors that also need to be tweaked. But I think the more that we can start with, okay, what can I do about this? The better, the more likely it is that we can learn from it.
hmm And I really like that idea, because when you see yourself as a leader, you see yourself as responsible for what's going on. When you see yourself as a follower or as a victim, it's easy to blame someone else. And so you every every teacher knows they can go into their classroom, shut the door, and do whatever they want, right? And they can teach however and whatever they want. And they do that when they feel like they are being told to do things in a certain way, and that's their way of rebelling. However, that's the reality from beginning to end. And there's no need to do that in a rebellious stance, but rather to do that in a leadership stance, to say, I have control over this situation, and I have a responsibility as well to do something great with these kids. And I've seen teachers who have that mentality, and I've seen teachers who don't. And those who do, it's very visible, and you can tell that they are really, really attuned to what they have responsibility for, and why it's so important for them to do their work so well, and that they can change so many outcomes that many others would feel they have no opportunity to change at all.
It's also more student centric, I think, in the sense that
Yeah.
if you're taking a leadership role, you also then know that self-care is really important, because you're modeling it, right? And you see all the different opportunities, and it's all tied together. Having a growth mindset, and modeling for your students what that means and what that looks like, and always remaining. And one more thing, I guess, is remember that before anyone is a teacher or a school leader or an administrator, they're actually a human being
Yeah.
with needs, you know? And with those emotions. And the same is true for everybody else in the field, even a student, even like everybody. And so the difference, I guess, with teachers in particular is that if you are a teacher, it's such a defined personality, like identity. Like when somebody is a teacher, suddenly it means that everything has to be G rated in your life.
Yeah.
Right? Or if anyone, I recently complained about this to a friend. I was like, why in media is in not like, imagine how cool it would have been if Friends, like or a show like Friends, one of them just happened to be a teacher. It's not in the foreground, it's just a part of who they are. Because I think people forget that these teachers are human beings. And
Yes.
and like they're going to want to also live life, their own life.
Yeah.
And I think that's just so, talk about patterns, right? It's so ingrained in our society that if you're a teacher, then this is who you are. And it's such a defined identity that um, many people start to believe it. And they're like, well, this is who I am. I am a teacher. And it's like, no, I teach and I'm Nadine and I am a teacher. Like, you know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like, same as a parent has a similar thing. When you're a mom, for example, when I was a new mom, it was very defined for me what that was supposed to mean. And I was a working mom and it didn't fit into the defined sort of definition of what that meant. And it brings up all sorts of emotional responses of guilt and all sorts of other things. And I think teachers feel the same way, as this identity that's kind of forced upon you, and accepted by many. And I think that we just have to stop for a second and remember that actually we're human beings first. And teaching is what we do. We happen to care a lot about it, but it's not our sole defining feature.
Yeah. And when those disappointments come, as they will, when you are defining yourself as a teacher, it is that much more difficult to manage the challenge, the burnout. Like if you define yourself as a teacher before you define yourself as a human, and then you get burned out from teaching, then you feel like a complete failure because the thing that you've used to define yourself is is causing you grief and stress and you feel like you can't do it anymore. That's a very dangerous place to be because if that's what you're living for, then that gets taken away or becomes too much, then you feel like you don't have anything else to live for. And that's not a healthy place to be for sure.
Talk about an existential crisis, right?
Yeah,
That's
no kidding. Yeah. Nadine, this has been awesome talking with you. Thank you so much. pdreimagine.com for support in teacher burnout. That's free for teachers. So if you're listening to this, go check it out. And if you are a principal or superintendent, then go there as well and say you want to partner with them to do this for all your teachers. And this is a great way to support others and help them, stay in the career longer because they're feeling satisfied and happy. Thank you so much, Nadine, for being here.
Thank you so much for having me.